So for a long time, we have been hearing the narrative that it was Officer Chauvin's knee that killed George Floyd. It was Officer Chauvin who asphyxiated George Floyd. And if you did not believe that narrative, if you just by a little bit questioned the narrative, you always heard the same response. Well, then what do you do with the fact that Mr. Floyd was screaming, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe"? That's the Pierce Morgan version of the narrative. But then, of course, you also have the Michael Eric Dyson narrative, and that is the man was saying he could not breathe. Well, I mean, when a brother is saying I can't breathe, then I think you are obligated, just for the sake of humanity and moral principle, to believe him and to, get your knee off of his neck. Because if he's saying I can't breathe, then, you got to believe him. A brother ain't going to lie. And he was also crying for his mother. I mean, horrible. Where is the humanity? Where is the humanity? So this is the typical narrative, the rhetoric that we have been hearing for months and months and months and months now. And looking at the trial, I have been keeping track of this trial here and there. And looking at the trial, I just saw the cross-examination between Chauvin's lawyer, Mr. Nelson, and the man that actually did the autopsy for George Floyd, the Hennepin County medical examiner, Andrew Baker. And Andrew Baker said quite emphatically that there were no signs of asphyxiation. And he said that he has dealt with many cases of asphyxiation, doing, his work of carrying out autopsies. And so he knows when he sees an asphyxiation, and he did not see signs of asphyxiation on Floyd's body. What Mr. Baker said was that Floyd's heart disease, his bad heart condition, his drug consumption, his consumption of methamphetamine and fentanyl, these things are what contributed to his death, and the stress of the arrest are what pushed him over to the edge, into dying, into his death. So it was the stress of the arrest, because anyone who's being arrested is going to be stressed out to a certain extent. I assume so. I mean, I think any normal person would be stressed out being arrested. So there is the stress of being arrested, but that's not the fault of the officers. That's not the fault of the officer. When an officer arrests you, he is doing his job, because his job is law enforcement. And no, there is no a Nuremberg argumentation in what I'm saying, because you're gonna, there are always going to be these people who are going to say, well, he's saying, he's simply using the Nuremberg argument. Are you saying he was just following orders and therefore it was okay? I'm not using the Nuremberg argument. I am using the argument that consists of the reality that law enforcement has to exist. And the job of law enforcement is, as its title states, to enforce the law. So every society needs police officers because every society needs to enforce its laws. This is not a Nuremberg argument. This is simply pointing to the reality that we need police officers, and this is what cops do. Just as it is a reality that every society, every country has a military force. And it is the job of the military force to defend the country in the field of battle. And soldiers kill other soldiers in that situation, in that phenomena. It's not the fault of the soldiers when they are in the middle of a battle and they have to return fire. Just as it is not the fault of an officer when he is doing his job and arresting someone, that the one who's being arrested is having some stress because he's being arrested. It's like if you're being interrogated for a crime and you feel a level of stress because you're being interrogated and you are in an interrogation room, it's not the fault of the interrogators that you feel stress. Now, for a long time, we have been hearing these reports from CNN, MSNBC, all of the alphabet media about experts. This police expert said this. This medical expert said that. That's all meaningless when it's put against the Hennepin County Medical Examiner. Why? Because he's the one who did the autopsy. It's his witness that matters the most. Not this Thomas woman that they brought in to counterattack the Hennepin County Medical Examiner. They brought this woman with short hair. Her last name is Thomas. And they brought her in to say, well, no, actually, it's not true. It was, it's the knee, blah, blah, blah. They brought her over to reinforce the narrative. But it's meaningless when put against the autopsy guy, the one who did the autopsy on Floyd. And what this guy has said is very significant. And I'll read to you guys some excerpts from a couple of articles that I looked through. One is from CNN and the other one is from the Washington Post. And the article from CNN says, Baker said he conveyed to county prosecutors soon after the autopsy the, quote, lack of anatomical findings, unquote, that would support the conclusion Floyd died of asphyxiation. Because we've been hearing this whole time. Oh, say his name. His name is George Floyd. And then the big quotation marks over it. I can't breathe. Say his name. His name is George Floyd. He said, I can't breathe. That means he could not breathe. That means the officer suffocated him. It was asphyxiation. The knee cut off his breathing, yo. The knee cut off his breathing, yo, because when a brother says, I can't breathe, you are obligated to believe him. Even though he has meth in his blood. And when someone is on meth, their adrenaline is up 10 times higher than what is normal. And he is a potentially very, very dangerous person. Doesn't matter. If he says, I can't breathe, you get your neck off his neck. You get your knee off his neck. That's been the rhetoric, right? I can't breathe. He was saying I can't breathe while the knee was on his neck. But he was saying I can't breathe when he was in the police vehicle. When he was in the police vehicle, he was saying I can't breathe. So which one is it? Is it the knee that made him say I can't breathe? Or was it something else? Because when he was in the police vehicle, he was saying the same exact thing. So we have to look at other factors. What's the other factors? Bad heart and drug consumption. Bottom line. It was the bad heart and the drug consumption which contributed to his death. The stress of the arrest made it worse. If he did not have those drugs in his blood, and if he did not have bad heart conditions, he would have been still alive. Because there was no sign of asphyxiation. Well, then that means we have to reform the way police officers do arrests. No, because it is not the job of the officer when he is in the middle of arresting someone to say, are you under any stress right now, sir? Do you have any drugs in your blood? Because that's not what officers are obligated to do. Their obligation is to arrest people who are under suspicion of committing a crime. And Mr. Floyd committed a crime when he robbed a pack of cigarettes using a fake $20 bill. And the cops came, and they did their jobs, and they arrested him, and the stress of the arrest restricted his breathing. The stress of the arrest mixed in with the drugs in his blood, mixed in with his bad heart condition, messed up with his breathing. He had a panic attack. He was panicking. He had difficulty breathing because of the drugs and the bad heart condition. So in other words, this was not an act of malice on the part of Mr. Chauvin. Because when you're looking at a murder trial, you have to determine if there was malice involved. Malice, meaning, did you have malintentions when this person died? Did you have malintentions when you were on top of this guy before he died? It's obviously not. There obviously wasn't malintention. Mr. Chauvin didn't wake up in the morning and during breakfast and said, go and kill me some coloreds today. That's not what happened. What happened was what has happened many times in the past. Someone has drugs in their blood. Someone has a bad heart. Someone has meth. And the stress of being arrested exasperates what the drugs and the bad heart was already doing to him. That is not the fault of the officer. That is the fault of Mr. Floyd. He committed a crime. When you commit a crime, expect to get arrested. He was taking drugs, hard drugs like meth and fentanyl, which are very, very dangerous. And fentanyl is known to cause a restriction of breathing. It is known to hinder and impede your breathing, and it is known to cut your breathing off completely and kill you. That is not the fault of Chauvin. That is not the fault of the officers. That is the fault of Mr. Floyd. When you take drugs like fentanyl and meth, you should expect to possibly die from taking these drugs. Floyd had hypertension, heart disease, hypertensive heart disease, Baker said. Quote, meaning his heart, this is what the medical examiner said, meaning his heart weighed more than it should. This meant Floyd's heart needed more oxygen than a normal heart and was limited in its ability to provide more oxygen when there was a demand for it. When you have a bad heart, why the hell are you taking drugs? So this is irresponsibility on the part of Floyd, not on the part of the officers. In the midst of an altercation and being held to the ground, adrenaline would pour into the body, Baker said, making the heart beat faster. In my opinion, the law enforcement subdual, restraint, and the neck compression was just more than Floyd could take by virtue of those heart conditions. So there you go. And then Chauvin's lawyer asked the medical examiner, quote, so in your opinion, both the heart disease as well as the history of hypertension and the drugs that were in his system played a role in Mr. Floyd's death. And this is what Mr. Baker said, quote, in my opinion, yes. That is an emphatic yes. And this is from the Washington Post. Quote, the medical examiner did not point to asphyxia. However, in a contrast to other medical experts who spoke this week, Baker said that in his opinion, Chauvin's knee would not, quote, anatomically cut off Mr. Floyd's airway. And I watched the cross-examination, and what Mr. Baker said was there are two essentially big veins on the sides of the neck. So there's one here and one here. There's a big vein on each side of the neck. Even if you were to press hard on this vein, blood would still be going up. Another thing that I want to mention, you have these people who are like, well, it was a blood choke. It was a blood choke. Here's the thing about blood chokes, because there's two different types of chokes. There's an air choke, the one that prevents you from breathing, like a rear naked choke or a guillotine. That's an air choke. And there's a blood choke. A blood choke is what restricts the blood. A blood choke is a choke that restricts the blood from going up to the brain and thereby making you pass out. With an air choke, you can't breathe. With a blood choke, you can still breathe. Blood chokes are trickier because you still feel like, oh, I can breathe, but the blood is not going up to the brain and you pass out. So even if the knee was restricting blood flow to the brain, that would not cause Mr. Floyd to say, I can't breathe. Yeah. So there you have it, everyone. Baker affirmed that methamphetamine is a stimulant that causes the heart to beat faster and work harder. It's very simple. This is the bottom line of the case. They're going to still try to get Chauvin on something. They're going to say, well, excessive force or whatever. But you can't get him on malicious murder charges. And they're going to try to get him on murder. They're going to try to get him on something. And if they can't get him on anything, they're going to try to use this story to break down the police even more. They're going to say, well, we need to reform how we arrest people. And that's what's dangerous. When they start restricting the way officers arrest people, they start weakening the cops. And before you know it, we're like France, where some police officer gets an award for not attacking rioters. Bullcrap like that. And that's what really worries me. There's just so much insanity in this story. This worship of George Floyd. You know what it is? It's America's worship of thugs. America worships thugs. Let's be honest here. America has a thug cult. Remember the movie Indiana Jones, when Indiana Jones was fighting against the Thuggies? The word Thuggy actually comes from India. Thuggies, by the way, were cultists who worshipped the sinister goddess of Hinduism, Kali, and they committed human sacrifices. The word thug comes from the word thuggy. So we have a thug cult in America, and we worship that. And when we hear about the evil white cop who arrests a black guy who has committed a crime, and the guy dies, the evil cop is always automatically bad because we watched the movies when we were younger. We watched Training Day or whatever, and we thought, the thug was so cool. The little white cop was so wimpy. We don't want to be that guy. We want to be the guy that Denzel played, not the other guy. And so we have this worship of the criminal. That's why you listen to rap music, and you have these women in these songs saying, I want a thug, I want a soldier. By soldier they mean thug. I want a DJ. By DJ they mean junkie. We worship losers, okay? It's just I'm saddened to say that about America, but in America we worship trash. We worship trash. That's what we do in America. We take trash culture, we exploit it, we glorify it through the music industry, be it ghetto trash, white trash, be it whatever. We glorify. We got a music industry for every type of trash of every demographic of the country, and we uplift that and we glorify that, and that's it. Italian mafia? Oh, no. Antonio Vivaldi, the great Italian composer? Oh, forget that guy. All these great Italian thinkers and composers, forget all those guys. We want to talk about Al Capone. Why? Because we worship the trash of society in America. That's what we do in this country. That's what we do. Bottom line. We worship the trash of society. And so when we hear about trash being, I don't want to say being killed, but when we hear about trash dying under the watch of a police officer, we don't say, well, was there drugs in the system? Did the guy have a bad heart? Did the guy have some kind of pre-existing conditions? No, we don't ask those questions. We have automatic hatred for the cop. Why? Because rebelliousness and the love of evil has triumphed in much of American society. And that's what I have to say about this. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.